Lord Chesterfield said, "We are more than half what we are by imitation. The great point is to choose good models and to study them with care. We're more than half what we are by imitation." And 300-some years ago, René Descartes, the French scientist and philosopher, said, "The chief cause of human errors is to be found in the prejudices picked up in childhood." And the modern philosopher George Santa Anna wrote, "Children insensibly accept all the suggestions of sense and language. Belief then settles down in sullenness and apathy to a narrow circle of vague assumptions, to none of which the mind need have any deep affinity, none of which it need really understand, but which nevertheless it clings to for lack of other footing. The philosophy of the common man is an old wife that gives him no pleasure, yet he cannot live without her, and he resents any aspersions that strangers may cast on her character." People are not naturally skeptics, wondering if a single one of their beliefs can be reasonably preserved. They are dogmatists, angrily confident of maintaining them all. All of this goes to point up the importance of deliberately choosing models we feel are worthy of emulation, and just as deliberately rejecting those which have not proved by the conduct of their own lives that they are worthy of our patterning our lives after. The greatest thing that can happen to a person is to find someone who represents what he himself wants very much to become, a fine model after whom he can pattern his conduct and attitudes. Whenever such a person is faced with a tricky decision, he can ask himself, "What would so-and-so do faced with this situation?" The answer is almost always clear. We have a way of knowing perfectly well what others, whom we know and admire, would do in a given circumstance, or at least we think we do, and it makes our decisions just that much easier, and at the same time tends to keep us on the right track. Going back to the Santa Anna quotation, he said, "People are not naturally skeptics, wondering if a single one of their beliefs can be reasonably preserved. They are dogmatists, angrily confident of maintaining them all." We should be skeptics with regard to our beliefs, unless we have been privately convinced that they are true and worth having. I like the statement of Nietzsche when he said, "The idea is not to have the courage of our convictions. It's to have the courage to challenge our convictions." Another thing that seems to frighten people is the idea that they might be thought to be inconsistent. We should be inconsistent and change as we grow toward maturity and fulfillment. There's nothing wrong in changing our minds. As Emerson put it, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. With consistency, a great soul has simply nothing to do. He may as well concern himself with his shadow on the wall. Speak what you think now, and tomorrow speak what tomorrow thinks, though it contradict everything you said today. As Chesterfield said, the great point is to choose good models and to study them with care. Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, and every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh. To be great is to be misunderstood. Living these days tends to become so complex that we have a way of forgetting what's important, and from time to time it's an excellent idea to return to the basics. Go over the ground rules and make sure we've still got them fixed in our minds. I recently had occasion to do some motivational work with many thousands of employees of one of the country's largest business firms. I found there was a good deal of confusion among the younger people, especially regarding what it takes to succeed. It seems that while most people have no trouble at all understanding cause and effect as it works on bodies in a physics class, they seldom make the connection between this same law and themselves. The law of cause and effect can be restated as it applies to people, but it works much the same way all the same. Every act we perform during our waking lives is a cause, and it will have a corresponding effect. By controlling the acts we perform, we can thus control what will happen to us. Barring a calamity of some sort which is beyond the area of our personal control, we can, by controlling our thoughts and acts, control our lives. Now, we found that this came as news to a surprising number of young people, as did other information relating to the same law of cause and effect. In restating this law as it applies to successful living, we might say, our rewards in life will always be in exact proportion to our service. For example, you can tell what a business firm is doing for the community by observing what the community is doing for the business firm. If the firm wants a larger slice of community rewards, more sales and profits, let's say, why, then it must come up with more service. Again, cause and effect. If any given person wants more in the way of rewards, psychic or tangible or both, he too must find ways of being of greater service. The trouble with so many is that they tend to forget this rule, if indeed they ever really understood it, get themselves into ruts of habit, and operate on minimums. This simply guarantees that they'll receive minimum returns. You'll even hear such people say, I do no more than I have to. I'm not going to do any more than I'm paid to do. Well, these are people who have forgotten, who have never learned the first rule of successful living. They don't understand that they're controlling their own returns. By performing at minimum standards, they're keeping themselves at the bottom of the pile. Standing in the biggest gold mine on earth, they insist upon using a teaspoon instead of grabbing a snow shovel. If a person would form the habit of asking himself every morning while he's taking a shower and getting ready for work, how can I increase my service today? And if he'd then come up with an idea or two, he'd soon find himself at or near the top of the pile. He would find himself receiving all sorts of interesting benefits on and off the job. It's been said that none of us is smart enough to remember everything he knows. Most of us know this simple rule that works like magic in our lives, but we tend to forget it. It's been said that we need reminding as much as we need educating, and from time to time we need to return to the old basic rules. They give meaning and stability in what can otherwise seem like a confusing world. Back when John W. Gardner was president of the Carnegie Corporation and before he became secretary of the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, he wrote a piece for Harper's Magazine on how to prevent organizational dry rot. It was so good that I clipped it and tucked it away, and here in a much abbreviated form are some of John W. Gardner's rules for keeping an organization young and vital. 1. The organization must have an effective program for the recruitment and development of talent. People are the ultimate source of renewal. The shortage of able, highly trained, highly motivated men and women will be a permanent feature of our kind of society, and every organization that wants its share of the short supply is going to have to get out and fight for it. 2. The organization must be a hospitable environment for the individual. Organizations that have killed the spark of individuality in their members will have greatly diminished their capacity for change. 3. The organization must have built-in provisions for self-criticism, an atmosphere in which uncomfortable questions can be asked. The Turks have a proverb that says, the man who tells the truth should have one foot in the stirrup. This should not be true of the vital organization. 4. Fluidity of internal structure. There have to be departments and divisions, but jurisdictional boundaries tend to get set in concrete. Pretty soon, no solution to a problem is seriously considered if there's any danger that it will threaten jurisdictional lines. 5. An adequate system of communication. Easy, effective communication. 6. The organization must have some means of combating the process by which men and women become prisoners of their procedures. The rule book grows fatter as the ideas grow fewer. Some years ago, a wholesale firm noted that some of its small shopkeeper customers were losing money because of antiquated merchandising methods. The firm decided that it would be good business to assist the shopkeepers in bringing their methods up to date, but soon discovered that many had no desire to modernize or bring them up to date. They just loved the old money-losing, inefficient ways. 7. The organization capable of continuous renewal will have found some means of combating the vested interests that grow up in every human institution. The lowest employees have their vested interests, every foreman has his, and every department head has his. Every change threatens someone's privileges, someone's authority, someone's status. 8. The organization capable of continuous renewal is interested in what it is going to become and not what it has been. 9. An organization runs on motivation, on conviction, on morale. People have to believe that it really makes a difference whether they do well or badly. They have to care. They have to believe that their efforts as individuals will mean something for the whole organization and will be recognized by the whole organization. Change is always risky, usually uncomfortable, also painful. It isn't accomplished by apathetic men and women. The future of a country or an organization of any kind depends on its capacity for self-renewal, and that in turn depends on the vitality of the organization and individuals that make it up. Here's a little exercise in imagination for you. Let's say you were shipwrecked and found yourself in a small boat or on a small island with a handful of other survivors. How long do you think you would all get along well together? How long would it be before different personalities would begin to chafe and wear thin? Well, a family is in many ways like a small group marooned. The members of the family are stuck with each other. Every morning, every night, and on weekends, the little group must get together and live together. No two of the members are alike. Each has a completely different personality, different likes and dislikes. Each has problems which he or she considers to be important. Each sees the world and life from his own unique viewpoint and interests. Yet they must live close together, in the most intimate of relationships, for years, year after year after year. And this can give you an idea why the happy, loving family is about as rare as 25-carat diamonds. It's also why, in even the best managed and usually happy homes, there are times when visiting these homes is like jumping into a river full of piranhas. Someone reached the breaking point, when someone else goes a little too far, and suddenly war is declared. It's believed that much of the discord in the average household could be avoided if more people realized that they're in this lifeboat or small island predicament. That is, if they understood a little better that human beings, any and all human beings, have trouble getting along when they're jammed into close quarters for an extended period of time. The man and his wife and the kids who are old enough to be reached with this idea need to understand that the problem does not necessarily lie with Charlie or Joan or little Willie or whatever their names are. They need to understand that the same problem would exist no matter who on earth they happen to live with. Everyone has faults, moods. Changing husbands or wives and raising new kids is nothing more than changing one set of problems for another. A friend of mine was married 6 times in his search, I suppose, for the one woman that he could live with amicably for an extended period. The only thing this achieved was to keep him broke paying alimony and making settlements. I think he finally came to the realization that there is not a woman on earth he could live with in a constant state of bliss. He, of course, had no intention of changing, and the same problem that brought about the divorces with numbers 1 and 2 brought about divorces numbers 3 through 6. I think the lifeboat analogy is particularly apt because a home is, in many respects, like a lifeboat. It's the way to life and survival, but the problems are built in and should be discussed so that every member of the family makes a constant, conscious effort to contribute to the well-being and success of so precarious a journey. Understanding the problem could keep someone from being pitched overboard. When all the people in a boat are pulling together, each one giving of himself for the good of all, the odds are good they'll have a safe journey. Well, how are you doing in the enthusiasm department these days? The saddest days of our lives are those days in which we can find nothing to be enthusiastic about. I think you can say that a person's enthusiasm is in direct proportion to the importance of what it is he's looking forward to. Thus, there are all sorts of degrees of enthusiasm. People tend to be mildly enthusiastic on Fridays simply because it's the last day of the week and they've got a free weekend coming up. People tend to be more enthusiastic about going home after work at night than they are about leaving for work in the morning. But the most fortunate people on earth are those who live most of their lives in a state of energizing enthusiasm. And you know what the key to enthusiasm is? Well, there are 2 keys, really. One comes from learning, the other comes from accomplishment. Learning new things tends to keep our enthusiasm high. Perhaps this explains the natural enthusiasm of children. If you've paid much attention to children, you've noticed that they're naturally enthusiastic and they're naturally happy. The reason adults tend to lose a lot of their enthusiasm for living is that they usually stop learning. As soon as school's over, they take the stand, consciously or unconsciously, that they know enough. Any learning they do from that point on, they do passively through the natural passage of time and experience, or, again, passively through the media of newspapers, radio, and television. If new learning comes to them, it does so largely through no efforts, or at least minimal efforts on their part. Learning little that is new or interesting, their lives become repetitious and settle down into well-worn grooves. They see the same people and go through the same motions every day, and gradually or quickly, all or most of the enthusiasm fades from their lives. The second key usually ties in with the first, the second key being accomplishment. It's pretty hard to accomplish something new without first learning something new, even if the accomplishment is limited to improving one's golf game or making furniture in the basement. But we're enthusiastic when we're working on a project we want to complete or master. The key word there is want. It has to be something we want very much to do, as opposed to those duties and projects we must do whether we like them or not. Did you ever get a good look at a dog's face when he's chasing a rabbit? It's the happiest, most alert expression you'll ever see in your life. He's got something wonderfully worthwhile to do, and he's having the time of his life trying to do it. You'd hardly know it was the same dog you saw snoozing and twitching on the back porch before the rabbit came into the picture. He couldn't even keep his eyes open then. It's the same with people. The rabbit may be different for each of us, but it's our job to flesh it out. The word enthusiasm comes from the Greek word entheos, which means the God within. And the happiest, most interesting people are those who have found the secret of maintaining their enthusiasm, that God within. You know, one of the most difficult things to teach, and because of this, the most difficult thing for a person to learn, is the all-powerful force of faith or belief. As the great Dr. Ernest Holmes once put it, and he devoted his life to the teaching of this great truth, here's a power which every person has, but which few people use consciously. One man does not possess this power above another, or to a greater degree. Everyone has it, since everyone lives and has consciousness. The question, then, is not, do we have the power? It is merely, are we using it correctly? Dr. Alexis Carrel, the great Nobel Prize-winning physician, said that when a person discovers the extent of his powers by the conscious and correct use of faith or belief, or whatever you want to call it, he finds that there has been introduced an entirely new set of laws into his experience. New to his experience, yes, but the laws are not new themselves. When a person discovers what the power of belief can mean, how it can revolutionize a life for the better, he is at first astounded until he realizes that his former life was operating on the same principle. The difference is that the person who understands uses this power for good to achieve the things he wants to achieve, while the person who does not understand uses the same power to hold himself back, to limit himself, and to live a sort of half-life, a second-hand life. It would be a great surprise to most people to discover that the very law which now holds them back, holds them in a kind of bondage, is the very same law which could free them if they just used it in a slightly different way. To illustrate this point, Dr. Holmes would quote the poem which goes, "One ship drives east, and another drives west, with the self-same winds that blow. 'Tis the set of the sails and not the gales which tell us the way to go." Now, this makes a good point. With a sailboat, you can go east or west, steer onto the rocks, or bring it gently to anchor in a snug harbor, all with the same wind, blowing in the same direction. It's all up to you and the way you handle the tiller and the sails. And when you're talking about faith and belief, you have to bring in the greatest book ever written, and the greatest teacher of the ages on this subject. And he summed it all up when he said, "Go thy way, and as thou hast believed, so be it done unto thee." This is the sentence or the glory of every human being. As he believes, so is it done unto him. But the power of belief is with him. It's his sailboat, and it's his hand on the tiller, whether he knows it or not, or whether he likes it or not. And the same force that leads one person into fulfillment and happiness and abundance keeps another person plodding on the fringes, looking, as Hausmann put it, fearful and afraid at a world he did not make. The pity of it is that the world could be his if he only understood that most difficult thing, to teach or to learn, that we become what we think about, that as we believe, so is it done unto us. It's good for all of us to remember that bit about the sailboat. If the direction we're heading is not to our liking, maybe we need to remind ourselves that we're the ones who are steering the boat. Would you say that you're a wave maker? That is, do you make waves in your pond? Are you a boat rocker, or do you tend to shy away from rocking the boat? Supervisory Management had something interesting on this, written by Mr. R.S. Reynolds, Jr. He said a business managed by men who are playing it safe cannot thrive. Take a look at the top 100 companies today. They're the doers, the innovators, and they reached the top because they refused to play it safe. Now, it's common knowledge that some people resist change because it threatens their status and security. They're afraid that innovation will rock the boat. But you don't get superior performance from people who are afraid the boat will rock. You get it from ones who want to row, or at least help row the boat. Now, what are the earmarks of the manager who helps mold the company instead of being molded by his own routine, his fear of change? He makes things happen. He's an innovator. He can be judged by the men who work for him. By delegating his work to good men, he helps them grow in their jobs, frees himself for further innovation. He's a skilled organizer. He's more a generalist than was yesterday's manager. He understands all phases of the company's operations, is quick to recognize new problems and opportunities. So said Mr. Reynolds. Each of us should, from time to time, rate himself on his skills as a manager. Everyone's a manager of something. To begin with, each of us is the manager of his own life. A husband and wife have substantial responsibilities as management people, especially when the children are involved, and their own well-being. But getting back to business management, I'm fortunate in that I regularly associate with top management people of some of the biggest and best companies in the world. They're clients of ours. And the one thing they have in common is that they're always up to something. There's always something exciting in the wind. The minute the boat starts to settle down, about 50 people grab the gunwales and start shaking it for all they're worth. They make mistakes from time to time. They're bound to. But they also make a lot of right decisions, too. Decisions that keep their companies moving up and ahead of the pack. In the executive offices of these companies, you're struck by a feeling of youth, even though the original founders may have been dead for decades. The fact that last year's sales ran into the billions of dollars doesn't mean a thing. That was last year. Yes, as Mr. Reynolds said, take a look at the top 100 companies today. They're the doers, the innovators, and they reached the top because they did not play it safe. The same thing will apply to the top 100 business firms in any big city in the country. They're managed by people who know that the smoothest water is the shallowest, and that's where the rocks lurk. How are you doing in the wave-making department? You never get promoted when no one else knows your current job. The best basis for being advanced is to organize yourself out of every job you're put into. Most people are advanced because they're pushed up by the people underneath, rather than pulled up from above. Here are a few reminders for those of us who expect to survive and prosper in the world of business, and advice for the person who plans to go into business for himself or rise in the ranks of the modern corporation. This first bit of advice was written by the well-known publisher and speaker Red Motley, who is a good friend of mine. He said, "Accept the fact that people do not need what you have to sell them. You may think they do, but they don't. Accept the fact that needs are not important, but that wants are all important. Millions of people ought to have what you're selling, but until you make them want what you have, they'll never buy it. Remember this. If a man is made to want something badly enough, nothing in the world can stand in the way of his getting it. Nothing happens until somebody sells something. The salesman, the want creator, is a very important person." That's right, Red. It's good. Sometimes we forget who the salesman is. He's the man with the briefcase getting on the plane, and he's the man knocking at your door. But he's also the man behind the door marked President, and he's the man burning the midnight oil at the advertising agency who knows the truth of Leo Burnett's comment that any fool can write a bad ad, but it takes a real genius to keep his hands off a good one. It was also Leo Burnett who said, after all the meetings are over, the phones have stopped ringing, and the vocalizing has died down, somebody finally has to get out an ad, often after hours. Somebody has to stare at a blank piece of paper. This is probably the very height of lonesomeness. Out of the recesses of his mind must come words which interest, words which persuade, words which inspire, words which sell, magic words. I regard him as the man of the hour in our business today. And Mr. Charles Brower, president of BBD&O, wrote, when you try to formalize or socialize creative activity, the only sure result is commercial constipation. The good ideas are all hammered out in agony by individuals, not spewed out by groups. I'd like to add that this should be of particular interest to that breed of modern executive who carries the delegation of authority to the point where he even expects all good ideas to come from minds other than his own. And quoting Mr. Brower again, he said, "There's no such thing as soft sell and hard sell. There's only smart sell and stupid sell." And since Mr. Brower has the floor, if you would succeed today, remember that this is the great era of the goof-off, the age of the half-done job. The land from coast to coast has been enjoying a stampede away from responsibility. It's populated with laundrymen who won't iron shirts, or when they do, they break your buttons, with waiters who won't serve, with carpenters who will come around someday maybe, with executives whose minds are on the golf course, with teachers who demand a single salary scale so that achievement cannot be rewarded, with students who take cinch courses. In the end, the formula remains the same today. Excellence in every department of your business. Excellence renewed every day. We all know really what it takes to succeed in the world of today, but it's good to be reminded once in a while to reaffirm our belief and start looking in corners for signs of the dust of complacency. Here's something you might find interesting. It's called The 4 Marks of an Educated Person. See if you fit. He speaks and writes clearly and precisely, no matter how much information he may have stored away in his brain. A man is not educated until he's able to use his mother tongue with grace, precision, and clarity. He has a set of values and the courage to defend them. Knowledge and experience have given him the capacity to discriminate not only between right and wrong, but also between the trivial and the significant, between that which is cheap and that which has integrity. He tries to understand his society and how it differs from others. He views these differences with compassion and respect, where the uneducated man sees them as evidence of his own superiority, regarding the customs of others with condescension or contempt. He looks squarely at the world and its problems, and always with hope. He neither rejects nor fears the complexities and the dangers of modern life, but accepts as his responsibility the task of making order out of complexity, opportunity out of danger. It's good, isn't it? How did you do? Did you qualify on all 4 counts? All 4 qualifications are well within the realm of achievement for anyone. To speak and write clearly and precisely, to have a set of values and the courage to defend them, to try and understand our society and how it differs from others, and to look squarely at the world and its problems, and always with hope. The 4 marks of an educated person. They appeared in the Rotarian some time back and were written by Grayson Kirk. And Dunn's Review made an interesting survey on executive wives. 60% of the executives surveyed filled out the questionnaire on the condition that they remain anonymous. Their answers indicate definitely that a wife can spell trouble, both for her husband's career and for the fortunes of his corporation. Most criticism boiled down to these 3 common complaints. The first is that she's a shrew who makes her mate unhappy at home, or she puts on the dog with other executives' wives, or she's a dominating type, pushing her husband along faster than his ability warrants. I get letters from this type occasionally. She'll write and say she thinks her husband should be doing better, or going after a better, more challenging job, or getting a raise. My suggestion is always that she let her husband decide what he should or should not do in the job department. If she wants to improve someone, she should start with herself. If she thinks it's so easy to earn more money, she can go out and do it, but she's wise to stay off her husband's back in this regard. Dunn's Review found that the perfect executive wife is well-mannered, gracious, even-tempered, interested in people, sociable, willing to travel, willing to move where her husband's job takes him, patient and sympathetic with her husband's career objective. Now, there are many in the women's lib movement who would object to this very strenuously, but anyway, that's what Dunn's Review found that the perfect executive wife amounts to. Now, should corporations look over the wife before they hire the man? More than 2/3 feel that it is important for top management to meet a man's wife before appointing him to a top position, or vice versa, to meet the woman's husband before she is appointed to a top position. How many times have you heard someone say, perhaps heard yourself say, "Oh, I'm a terrible letter writer. I'm all right until I sit down in front of a sheet of paper and then I just go blank"? Well, that's ridiculous. If you're a good, even a fair conversationalist, you can be a very satisfactory letter writer. Write the letter in exactly the same way and using exactly the same words and subjects that you would if the person to whom you're writing were present and sitting across the table from you and you were talking to him. Now, once this is understood, it then becomes a matter of practice. 2 women who, if they were in each other's company, could talk for several hours about things in which both of them have a great deal of interest, will, when writing to each other, have trouble filling a small sheet of notepaper. They could write wonderfully interesting letters to each other if they would write as they would talk if they were together. Each of them could easily fill 10 pages on both sides and provide her correspondent with a charming and interesting interlude reading the letter. The strange thing is that the thought of writing a letter shifts most people into a totally different gear. They suddenly become formal. People they've known for years, and this is also true of businessmen writing business letters, and whose presence would spark an interesting informal conversation, suddenly become distant strangers who must be addressed and written to in a stiff, cold, formal manner. Here are 5 rules semanticists and psychologists have long been recommending to businessmen whose livelihood can be determined in large measure by their ability to communicate. 1. Avoid words that are too familiar or not familiar enough. Overly familiar words tend to make little or no impression. However, your entire audience can be lost in a jungle of obscure words and phrases. 2. Don't confuse or misuse words. The dictionary is your best friend here, and careful checking can save you unnecessary embarrassment. For example, the word correspondent, spelled with 2 R's, is someone you communicate with. Spelled with 1 R, it's a person involved in a divorce suit. If you're at all in doubt as to the spelling of a word, take a minute to look it up. It's good practice, and you'll often find another good word to add to your vocabulary while you're searching for the one you want to use. In fact, you'll average 5 new words every time you look up a word. 3. Be terse. This is important in business letters, but not at all important in personal letters. 4. Recognize the connotation of a word as well as its denotation. A word's denotation is what it means precisely. Its connotation is what it suggests. To understand the difference, try calling a woman fat instead of plump. 5. Strive for simplicity. The best writing is always simple and easy to read and understand. At every opportunity, use the short, hard, gritty, colorful words that carry a bite and add zest to your correspondence. Practice writing interesting letters. Chances are you owe letters to someone. Why not answer them? And avoid cliches such as, I am fine and hope you are the same. You never said that to a person in your life. Your friend should be kept as carefully cultivated as a garden. One of the best ways to keep your friendships warm and close is to work on your correspondence.